Hi, it's Robert Mendelsohn, Fractional CMO here in beautiful Montreal, welcoming you to another episode of the Fractional Pros Canada podcast. We're part of Fractional Pros Canada, the home for Canada's fractional community, and you can find us on Facebook. We bring you conversations about everything fractional that matters, for fractional executives and businesses from coast to coast. Think of this as your go-to spot for real talk, practical wisdom, and strategies you can actually use, all without the corporate fluff and with plenty of Canadian content. Whether you're a fractional pro or a business in our great country of Canada and beyond, this conversation is for you. Grab your espresso and let's dive in. Welcome to the Fractional Pros Canada podcast. I'm your host and fractional CMO, Robert Mendelsohn, here in beautiful Montreal. And joining us today from just down the street is Inga Nwagbu. Inga is a business architect with over a decade of experience leading digital transformations for complex organizations like TD, BMO, Manulife, Deloitte, or Deloitte, as we say here in Quebec. And she's the founder of Eye of Another. She works with growing partner and founder-led professional services firms to vet their AI and tech investments before they break ground, auditing their operational readiness to ensure their digital transformations actually deliver ROI instead of weak adoption and costly rework. Today's episode, sponsored by the Fractional Pros Canada.ca directory. Scaling a business in Canada is hard enough without the high price tag of a full-time C-suite hire. Most CEOs I'm talking to need high-level strategy to break through. They don't want the overhead, the long-term risk, or the 6-month recruiting cycle. So when they ask for a shortcut, I direct them over to the Fractional Pros Canada directory, the curated hub for vetted, high-tier fractional talent like Inga, experts who step in, find the gaps, deliver ROI from day one. Instead of digging through generic job boards, savvy leaders go where the specialists are already gathered. So business leaders, find your next strategic partner on the directory at fractionalproscanada.ca. Inga, welcome to the pod.
Thank you for having me. I'm very excited.
All right. So I was digging back to your early days of your career. And if we go back to the mid-2000s, you were an IT consultant with HP,
Yes.
working on multi-million-dollar managed services agreements for financial clients. And then you jumped into healthcare technology as a lead workflow specialist at ConnectSol, which is funny because I have a client in the healthcare space. And they don't work with ConnectSol necessarily, but I've definitely seen their name come up. So funny coincidence there.
Yeah.
So take us back when you're on the ground mapping out hospital workflows and enterprise IT renewals way back at the beginning. What did that teach you about human behavior, shall we say?
Honestly, that was probably when I received the best piece of advice I ever got, that what I would carry throughout my career, where they said that basically technology is Chrome. The real thing that makes an organization work is always its people. So anytime that you're considering making a kind of continuous improvement or change, and back then, that's when a lot of organizations were really big on lean. I don't know if you remember all that, but everybody was lean this, lean that, Sigma, everything. And especially in the hospital environment, everyone was exhausted because of all these initiatives that just kept rolling through one after the other. But what often got overlooked is the impact on the people who are responsible for making any of this work, regardless of workflow, patient outcomes, patient continuum. You're depending on the staff. And if the staff don't have what they need, which is with respect mostly to the process clarity or the data or the systems that enable them. Instead, they're living off of heroics and workarounds. Yeah, it doesn't matter what you put in there, what technology, it's going to fall on its face.
So I will quote you. Most professional services firms don't fail at digital transformation because of the tools they choose. They fail because their business isn't structured to support them.
Yes, very much so. It's a topic actually I've been talking about a little more recently on my YouTube channel and in social media. And it's around our mindset when we look at an organization. And it doesn't matter what kind it is. It could be not-for-profit, nonprofit, profit, you name it, everything. We tend to look at our organizations as silos. So department this, department that. Think of your typical org chart that has everybody laid out and who reports to whom. That's how we tend to just frame our thinking around, okay, if we're going to concentrate on sales, we've got to look mostly at the sales team. If we're going to concentrate on what we can do from a financial perspective, we're talking to all the finance experts and so on. But really, when we're talking about the organizational health and what it's capable of, that's what I describe as capability stability. And that is enabled by people, process, data systems, and governance. So it does not rely on whose department thinks they own what, because most departments don't own whatever the process or workflow is from end to end. They rely on other areas outside of them in order to deliver what they need to. So where I concentrate on is those cross layers in between that enable those enablers, the people, process, data systems, and governance that help them deliver what they need to. And I've found that for everyone that I've worked with, building that understanding about what those capabilities actually are, what they look like, who participates in them, where those different workflows are that intersect with them, they're often quite surprised just how vast it is. Or they had an inkling, but they didn't have a way of trying to visualize it properly that they could communicate it as effectively as they would have liked to.
Curious if you have any sense as to what the real difference is, if any, between an organization that has a lot of layers and a so-called flat organization. Do those flat organizations really run better? Or is it just they look better on paper, but at the end of the day, they suffer from the same problems as a non-flat organization?
Well, I guess it would depend on what your definition is of better. What I find, regardless of whom I've worked with over the years, one of their biggest issues is around communication, ownership of decisions, where the delays are actually happening. Often they will look at tools, usually as a solution. But often, and especially in the data space as well, there are a lot of organizations where they think they have control over their data. They understand what information flows in and out. But then you realize a lot of this stuff is living in disparate towers of knowledge, whether it's the people or it's a spreadsheet or it's some distant cloud folder somewhere. The integration is really lacking when it comes to the data aspect. Those are the most common things that I see. And it doesn't matter whether they have 11 people or they have 500 people, which is usually the sphere I work within. Those things will come up a lot.
So the basic problems transcend whatever type of organizational structure is in place.
Yeah. I mean, in the tech world, you hear a lot about people talking about integrators and integration, but they're focusing on, okay, what systems need to be able to speak to each other, which is important, right? Because you need to know what can do that. But ultimately, the integration of those layers that I talked about earlier, the people, process, data systems, and governance, that is usually where you're going to see the biggest gaps because you have so many people working on islands of knowledge. Maybe not necessarily anyone's fault. That's just kind of what evolved because that's what we're used to. My most recent YouTube video I did, I was talking about the machine mindset versus the organism. And it's an analogy I use a lot when I'm talking about any kind of firm or organization. When I talk about the organism, if you take one part out, everything else has to adapt to that change. Unlike when you're looking at it like a machine, you take one part out, then you just replace it. You replace the person or you replace the tool. It's not nearly as cut and dry as that.
I feel like it's always easier. It's the path of least resistance to bring in somebody to make sure, like you said, that our systems can talk to each other because it's within our control and it's easy, in quotes, to fix that, to make sure that it's working really well. Whereas when you're dealing with people, as they say, you can only control what you can control. And as we all know, people are a heck of a lot more difficult to control. So, I mean, that's often where the problems are, right? The communication problems that you're talking about. It's people who aren't communicating well. And that is a much tougher nut to crack.
Yeah, very much so. And I find that is often buried within the culture of the organization as well. Like what has come before. Sometimes, I mean, I've worked in the past with firms where it was founder led probably for about 20 years. And you had one person who was like the key person. Like, I don't necessarily like to use this word, but linchpin for the sake of an example. And basically they were the fountain of everything. The history, why things were done the way they're done today. And it's easy to kind of rely on that person, especially if they've been around for a long time. But then when there's a change, such as they sold the company and somebody new came in and tried to, from their own Silicon Valley understanding of how these firms should work, he's trying to implement change as well. It's like, okay, well, we need to make sure that we have more points of, or rather less points of failover when it comes to who knows what, and more formalized documentation and processes around what we're doing. It gets really hard because for a lot of people, their experience is when someone like that comes in to bring about that transformation, it means jobs are going to be lost. So the next thing they start thinking is, okay, how much information do I share? Because the fact that I know this is actually part of the reason why I'm able to do what I do, and they keep me around. When really it's not necessarily about, and I emphasize this a lot in the past when speaking with people, someone like me coming in, I'm not looking to eliminate jobs. I'm trying to figure out how best does your organization actually work for your given market, for what your focus is, and in terms of what kind of outcomes you want to bring about, and work within what you do have to try and figure out what's the right path towards that. And many more times than not, bringing in a technology solution at that time isn't going to do it. It's more about getting that understanding, that organizational understanding clear, and those pathways of communication more clear. And then we can bring in a tool that will help enhance that. I could talk all day about that because it's just something that just keeps coming up over and over again.
So would you say that is that's the blind spot that a company is operating from when they make that purchase or that decision to bring in maybe it's a new AI implementation, very popular these days, and some new kind of automation suite, new CRM, something like that. Is that really, at the end of the day, the biggest problem, the biggest blind spot right there?
Yes. That, and like I mentioned earlier about data as well, which again is tied to the way that the organization communicates. Because if not everybody is using the same terminology when they're describing something, which happens a lot, even in smaller organizations, it becomes a nightmare when you're trying to set up these systems because they rely on a clear data model to be able to send the information where it needs to go, when it needs to get there, especially if you're doing any kind of integration.
So a lot of founders, C-suites will look at the solution and understand what the ROI equation is, right? We implement this, we immediately save X, we increase revenue by Y, etc. So how do you make the argument to them, hang on, slow down, before we do the implementation, let's step back, let's architect the business capabilities, how we're going to implement this and slow down. How do you, and now we're talking about a delay of maybe it's 3 months, maybe it's 6 months. How do you sell that as still giving them ROI, perhaps even more ROI, but how do you measure that and make the case from that point of view? How do you convince the CFO we got to put the brakes on here?
Well, I think one thing that everybody has in common in business is that they want to reduce risk as much as possible. So when I'm coming in, it's more so from the standpoint like, hey, you might be right, but let's make sure that we can manage any risks that might come up by validating what you suspect is true. So what I often start with is, I call it the automation readiness audit, where we sit down and we look at in really concrete detail, because I find also another bit of a gap sometimes when people are trying to describe, this is what we want to do. We want to be able to improve, speed up our onboarding or speed up our client to invoice pathway. When you ask them to describe it, like, and I describe it as like the 5 senses, like sight, smell, hearing, touch, you name it. And it's still vague because they're thinking more in terms of what it should do and not necessarily all the things that play a role in what that would actually look like for their employees, for their customers, for any other internal stakeholders that need to participate in making this a reality. So I take them through that saying, okay, this is what you said, that you want to speed up your onboarding. Let's go through and be clear about what are all the steps that take place. And as we're describing and I start asking questions, they'll like, oh yeah, that's right. We forgot there's this other team that they have to get this piece of documentation and then it's got to go to legal before we come back to XYZ. And then we can move on to the next step. So what I position is that first, we'll go through in very concrete terms and establish what it is that you're trying to do. We will trace it back to exactly what you need to be able to do it. And I don't necessarily mean your team. I mean, that's where I start talking about the capabilities. And then do a quick assessment as to how well those capabilities are performing. If they're in red, that means it's on fire. If it's green, you're great. Right. So, so the ones that are on fire are the ones that I really focus on to get to the root of, okay, why is this on fire? Why are people reporting that? Actually, no, this isn't even what we call this process, and we don't use that team. We go to another team that's located in another city. There's always delays when trying to explore that a little bit. And then once we have that understanding, trace it back to what they're talking about achieving and saying, okay, here's the thing. This particular step that you need to achieve in order to meet this outcome, it's in trouble. If this breaks, you're not going to make your outcome regardless of what technology you bring in. And the other thing that I also position as well is that I'm technology agnostic. I know quite a few people say that these days, but really at its heart, because I believe in that tech is just Chrome. You need to understand how you work, the way you want to work in the future, and what the gaps are between that. And then the technology is what you add on, because you want the technology, the automation, to speed up what works and not speed up what's broken.
So your audit process makes me think back to a whole different career I had many moons ago, where I had put together a line of chemical products. I was working for a chemical manufacturer, Avmore, and I put together a line of food plant sanitation products. And these were products you use to clean your food processing plant. And part of what I did as part of my education in the area, because I had no chemical background or chemistry or anything like that, is at the time there was this new certification that had emerged called HACCP, which stands for Hazard Analysis of Critical Control Points. And I went for the 2-day training. And basically what it is it's all about auditing the food processing plant and whatever they're doing in there. Where are the points when you're cleaning that are most critical to make sure you clean properly? Otherwise, the risk of contamination with, salmonella, fill in your favorite bacteria there, are much higher. So it sounds like your audit is very similar to that HACCP process.
Yes. Yeah. I mean, probably the most succinct way to put it is, okay, you've made a decision on what path you want to take towards your acquisition or your technology investment. And that's great. I just want to make sure that there's nothing underlying that will snarl that process up that you won't find out until you've already started implementing the solution, which then becomes way more expensive to fix in order to go back and figure out what went wrong and how to make this work. And that's usually the disaster area, is when you've already begun implementing or you're about to go live with your implementation. All these little things start creeping up, like the Pareto rule, right? The 80-20, just either to delay launching or to make a nightmare for the people who have to actually get started on this thing once it's turned on. So I really want to help firms avoid all of that by just making sure that the decks are as clear as they can be early on. Something that a lot of business architects say is we want to get ahead of that bus as early as possible, even if it's already left the garage. At least let's figure out which is the next city so we can get there and survey the road. Yeah.
So what is there ever a situation where there's a point of no return? The bus has left the station. It's, we know that it's already running. One of its tires is a spare tire that it's running on because it had a flat along the way, but it's still going. It's going a little slower. It took the wrong exit off the highway a couple times, but it's still kind of moving in the right direction. Is there a point where you can't stop it and restart it? You just need to try and fix it, and that's a better path than just scrapping it and starting over?
Come across too many scenarios where we had to start from scratch. If it was a start from scratch, it was more so how we're looking at this now, as opposed to we have to recreate the wheel. I wouldn't call it a point of no return. It's more about how much money do you want to spend to fix this? Because the later down the path, the price is going to skyrocket. So when I mentioned earlier about risk, what's your risk tolerance for that? If we skip steps now versus we have to revisit this 6 months, 2 years from now. And I have seen a number of situations where, yeah, it was 2 years, 5 years down the road. This thing is barely being used. People have come up with all kinds of workarounds and little like cottage technology off their desks to figure out how they're going to do this. And it's definitely a lot more lift when you're ready to actually look at what the root of the problem is versus trying to throw on a Band-Aid. But even then, I wouldn't say it's the end. It's more about, okay, this is going to be a heavier lift because we're looking at this 5 years in, 10 years in sometimes, depending on the organization.
What are some of the best practices you use for change management? And the extreme examples are you have somebody in the company who's already a very high performer who is running on like the current technology, the current infrastructure. You come along, the CEO comes along, whoever it is, and says, all right, guys, we're doing this. And this high performer is like, why should I start changing my ways? I'm killing it. I'm way above quota. I'm the most productive person in the company. Why should I change anything? Why fix it if it ain't broke? How do you get those kinds of people on board?
There's a couple of different things I've done in the past, or I still do today. Often what I like to do is have conversations with the key people that have already been identified as being part of that capability or that process or that workflow, and get from them their perspectives on what they think is working versus not working. I have met some of those high rollers, those high performers that say, yeah, things are great. But, when you start asking the right questions, you do a little bit of the 5 whys, and they'll be like, oh, yeah, but there is this one aspect. Okay, do you know with whom that you have to figure this out or how long it takes? Oh, yeah, and then more stuff will bubble up. So there's usually a couple rounds with those key people, and then I take that and put together a picture to figure out what is the commonality that's coming up. And then when we meet as a group, I throw it up there for everyone to see. Most people intuitively understand that whatever it is that they're part of, even though people say it's, okay, step 1, step 2, step 3, all the neat boxes, reality, it's spaghetti. It truly is. We've just learned how to navigate the spaghetti so we know what end to start with versus, where we have to bridge off to another part. So when they see that spaghetti, they do realize that, okay, this could either become a problem if it's not a problem from them already, or they realize it's a huge problem for an area that they actually depend on to make it possible for them to continue performing at the level they need to. And I found in more instances than not, once people realize that, they see the full picture, it's like, oh, okay, well, actually, yeah, we should fix this. And what can I do to help? I mean, with any conversation, when you're talking with somebody, they always want to know what's in it for me, right? And I always bear that in mind when I'm talking with people, is to kind of say, okay, well, what you're doing right now is great. I imagine you want to keep doing that. And this thing that you just surfaced where, oh yeah, we run into this issue from time to time. We don't want this to become a bigger issue. So let's start from there and see what we can do to help make that solve that issue and help make what you're doing continue at the level that you'd like. Oh, okay. Now, that doesn't work 100% of the time. Sometimes you do run into a wall when you're dealing with folks. And then at that point, it's trying to understand what is their motivation under that going on. Like what I mentioned earlier is if someone's proud of being the person that everybody has to come to ask this thing or that thing or to figure things out, sometimes it's a sense of, well, I need to make sure that I'm secure too. But I find as well, too, in the long run, even if you're looking at the situation from that perspective, your security will become increasingly threatened if other areas around you that you need are falling apart. So again, that bringing that holistic picture to everyone to say, like, you know what, you're not really an island. It feels like it, maybe because you don't talk to anyone most days, but you're truly not. You're in this organism, and what is happening in one aspect will eventually come and affect you.
That whole concept of getting, let's say the leadership team aligned, and what I love calling, what does good look like? What is the definition of success?
Yeah.
And especially when you got the C-suite in front of you, like you said, everybody's got their what's in it for me hat on, Everybody has different interests. Often everybody has a different view of what good looks like. Curious what kind of framework you use to navigate that, and at the end of the session, have everybody aligned on what.
One approach I like to use a lot with folks is around scenario building. So for any particular target or goal or outcome that you have pointed out, when I mentioned about using the five senses, I kind of gamified a little bit with folks to say, okay, in your experience, if you were the person, if you were the customer, or if you are the person that's picking up the call or whatever, what would that look and feel like for you if it worked? If it worked. And a lot of the time, what will come up is, or rather are those different ideas for them around what does it look like when it actually works? And what does it look like when it doesn't work? When it doesn't work, actually is one of the quicker ways to find out what are the underlying things that are, popping up as a repeatable theme. But as far as what would make this work, I find that actually helps when trying to figure out, okay, what's truly a nice to have versus what is a must have for this thing to go in day one. So those are the two approaches, approaching it from like the ideal and then from the least ideal. And people have fun with it because they don't realize, like, you're forcing them now to actually live in the scenario that they're envisioning for what they want to achieve. Like I mentioned before, a lot of the time when people come up with these objectives and so on, they're still very vague, or they're focused on numbers and not necessarily on actual lived experience. Not that they haven't had it, they just tend not to look at it in those dimensions. So what I try to do is ground them in that. Not only does that help to make it a little more concrete, but also gives them something to look forward to and a sense of, okay, oh, right, we're there because it looks like this. It looks like how I actually envisioned, how I described it. I think you hinted at this earlier, is that one of the tougher things is knowing, how do we know we're done? Or how do we know that we've actually achieved what we set out to achieve? And it begins with those scenarios, making that as concrete as possible. So it is recognizable when we get there, or it's recognizable when we're going off the rails.
Let's turn to everybody's favorite topic of the day, AI. First of all, I'm
Okay.
curious, how are you using AI in your practice, in your business personally?
I don't mean this to sound a little smart, but only where it makes sense. So I haven't gone in wholeheartedly on any specific automated workflows. What I look at are the things that I think can move relatively consistently without much risk, that don't need my immediate oversight. And actually, I describe that, and I use this in general for any sort of automation initiative, is the 3 rules of automation: that it has to be repeatable, it has to be low risk, and the data has to be consistent. So there's no surprises as to what this thing looks like if it doesn't if it doesn't pop up the way it should. And that's basically the same principle that I use when trying to figure out if I was going to use AI. But predominantly, it's more so for just organizing my thoughts, and then doing some small processes here and there that I know that I don't need to be necessarily involved in, or if it breaks, it's not going to be a huge sev issue. I can look at it within a day or so and it'll be fine.
Okay, and now client side, are you ever asked to make a recommendation of what kind of AI powered or automated workflow we should implement? Or are you more the person, they've already made the decision, you're brought in, help us implement this in the right way?
I have been involved with the solution recommendations themselves or the vendors, but I do that only after we've clarified what are the roots of the issues that we're trying to address and what it will look like when they're solved. Because then that's my guide then to go out there and come up with that short list of, okay, who fits this bill based on, what kind of features and capabilities they offer in their product solution. So what I mentioned earlier about being solution agnostic, that's why. I don't want to be biased by any particular buzzwords or craze that's going on regarding a specific tool. I want to make sure that whatever they invest in is grounded in that we know exactly what this looks like when it does work, and what is it that we're trying to solve or address as a result of choosing this particular solution.
So what are the biggest mistakes that companies are making when they make the decision, okay, we're going to implement AI into the company in whatever way they're going to do it? What is the biggest pothole that they ride into typically?
Well, there might be a few people that may object to what I'm about to say, but every time I keep hearing about AI strategy, what's our AI strategy or our AI capability? And I say this repeatedly, like that's the wrong approach. Yes, I know that AI is a very sophisticated tool, but it's still a tool because before AI came in, you still had to be able to do whatever it is that you wanted to do, whatever this workflow was. So the capability is what that workflow is enabling. AI is a means of which to do it. How I like to make the distinction is that a capability is the ability that a firm has to be able to do something. The tool is what you apply to the capability to make it possible for it to be done. So in that sense, AI is a tool that will make it possible for you to, whether it is to clarify or speed up your onboarding, whether it's to consolidate your knowledge base so it's quicker to find information, or to automate that so clients have a place to go to find answers to their questions. All of that is enabled by a tool. So when I keep repeating about people, process, data systems, and governance, the data systems is where the tools reside and the information that they need in order to be able to function. It's not always well received when I say it that way, but yeah.
So where do you sit as far as companies who view AI as more than a tool, but actually have added a seat for every employee to have an AI counterpart, and that AI counterpart, the people are told, treat them like your coworker in the next cubicle over, who can support you, help you out, help you go back and forth with some ideation, things like that. So elevating AI from just a tool to a person, how do you address that?
The first thing I ask when I see that kind of thing going on is, what problem are you trying to solve? Because the reason that you have people is because they bring a particular level of competence and expertise to the work that they need to do. And if they're working in some kind of, usually most organizations, when people work in teams, it's matrixed. They come from all kinds of different departments, not just one. They are combining that consolidated knowledge in order to be able to achieve whatever the goal was for that team. So when you're having people rely on an AI tool now, or whether it's a model or whatever the case may be, Copilot, you name it, to guide them through their work, what is it that you're actually solving there that they couldn't solve by just talking to each other, or by having structured meetings where they gather, they have a focused outcome that they have to achieve for that meeting, and then they break and then go off and do what they need to do? I'm not saying don't use AI to assist you, but I don't think we should be using AI as a replacement to working with each other in order to achieve our goals and keeping that organism alive. And there's also the aspect to, have you established what your governance is when it comes to what you actually put inside that AI? Like, who's allowed to access it? How much information are you able to share with it? How secure is it? Because those are questions, especially in sectors such as like with law firms and accounting and, all kinds of rules that we have to follow now with respect to privacy. You have to be careful with that. Now, I would be very concerned if I walked into an organization and what's really happening, and I have seen this happen, is that folks are just in AI having a free for all, and there's no real established standard or rules for how you're actually supposed to conduct yourself with it that keeps the organization at reduced risk.
Yeah, AI governance policies are remarkably still lacking, as much as companies are jumping into AI and it becomes an afterthought. It's often a case of, my house just got robbed, so I'm going to get an alarm system, right? It takes that incident to trigger what should have been done before.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and clients are asking more questions about that too. It's like, how do you use AI when you're doing this, that, and the other thing? And there's a few times where there isn't a clear answer, or the answer is a little bit hodgepodge. So that also kind of reduces confidence for your client base, right? If you're not clear on that, then how are they supposed to feel secure with providing the information that you're requesting from them?
Yeah, and it's interesting what you said before about, AI shouldn't replace people and, people should still have conversations. I totally agree with that. I've also seen companies where the thinking is, well, an employee having a conversation with one AI is kind of like having a conversation with a whole bunch of people at once, because the AI is, supposedly the collective knowledge of humanity, right? It's got it. It's
Mm.
got the whole internet in it, and that's the collective, everything that's ever happened. So all knowing, all seeing AI, there's a lot of efficiency to have there, and maybe we don't need people talking to people as much as they were before, and we need them talking to AI more. And we've even
Mm.
seen now, we're seeing, the C-suite, the leadership meetings, management meetings, there's now an active AI speaker who's participating in the meeting and absorbing everything going on. And at some point, the leader of the meeting will go, hey, AI, you're following all this. What are your thoughts on this topic? We're kind of struggling with figuring out a solution here. Help us
Mm.
out. So we're seeing that kind of thing happening. So again, we're really giving the AI a real person role on the HR map.
Yeah, yeah. And again, machines break. They break, right? Even AI, it still makes mistakes. No matter how sophisticated they have made the model, they have not eliminated, and nor are they going to be, because there is no perfect system. If it can't make mistakes, then it means it's perfect. And not to get too philosophical, but we're the people making it. Of course, it's going to be able to make mistakes. And even if it has the ability to correct some things, there are still iterations where it's going to fudge up other things. I mean, it's just sit down inside ChatGPT and we'll do a session long enough, and it starts to forget whatever it was that it was doing in the beginning of the session when you're about maybe 2-3 hours in. So I think I understand some of the attraction with doing that, but again, really, the purpose of technology is to help us do things more quickly. And the way that we benefit from something being done more quickly is because it was already more or less working, and what it's really just adding is being an amplifier. It's just speed. So if what you're really when you're setting up a situation where AI is now doing your thinking for you, who's doing the vetting that the thinking was actually clear? I think there was actually a study that came out a few months ago, and it might have been MIT or Harvard, where they had an example of going into all the major models and asking general questions about, oh, AI, how should I strategize this? Or what are the possibilities if I change our business model to that? And every time, it didn't matter what they changed in terms of the variables or the context or the framing, they all came out identical. So basically, and they all said basically it was a good idea too. So now you're talking to somebody that's like a sophisticated yes person.
But Inga, those studies you said were months ago. That's decades in AI time. And since then, we've had all these great, Fable has come out now. This is supposed to be the killer model, right? So I'll bet.
Right.
I mean, one would say that if they did those same studies again, totally different results.
Yeah, it might be worse.
So it sounds like you're not afraid that what you do is going to get replaced by AI anytime soon.
No, I don't really think so. And the reason I believe that is, again, where I see AI's greatest value is that a lot of the repeatable stuff that we were doing before that might take longer, it can do it much, much more quickly, like almost light years compared. And that's actually not a bad thing, so long as what it is that you're trying to speed up is clean. The data is clean. The steps are predictable and as low risk as possible, so that when something does blow up, it's not bringing down the whole organization or even bringing down a part of it. It's something you can clearly see where there was a mistake. I think actually what's really going to happen in the future, even though we've had a succession of major layoffs in a lot of different industries, and a lot of people are having difficulty finding those entry-level positions, is that because AI still does make mistakes, somebody who understands the process and the context in which it can blow up needs to be there to oversee it. So that is where the strategizing comes in. That is where the thinking on your feet comes in. That is where you're comparing past incidences of, oh, okay, this is what we did when it didn't work out. I don't think there is going to be a world where we can completely eliminate workarounds. And I don't think there should be a world where we don't have any workarounds, but we should understand why they exist and learn the lessons necessary from those workarounds to make us better performers, whatever it is that we're performing in. And then AI can be there to assist in making those steps that are more predictable and repeatable and low risk, a better aid for us so that we can concentrate more on those what if wild scenarios that can come up at any time.
All right. An optimistic outlook on the future of the world with AI. It's a good point for us to end on. Let's hit you up with the last question we always ask here on the Fractional Pros Canada podcast. So if you could put one message on a billboard for millions of fractional executives and business leaders to read and see and get inspired by every day as they drive by it on the highway of life, what would that one message be?
Oh, there's always hope. There's always hope. There's always hope. Yeah.
That sounds at once hopeful, but also ominously depressing.
It depends on how you want to look at it, but either way,
full,
it's always
empty.
there.
There you go. Little something for everyone there. All right,
Yeah.
Inga, thank you so much for joining us here today on the Fractional Pros Canada podcast.
Thank you so much for having me. It was a pleasure.
That's a wrap on another episode of the Fractional Pros Canada podcast. If you're a fractional professional based in Canada, we'd love to have you join us in the Fractional Pros Canada Facebook group, the home for Canada's fractional community. It's where Canadian fractional executives connect, share insights, and help each other succeed. Until next time, I'm Robert Mendelsohn, Fractional CMO. May your impact be full-time, even if your hours are fractional.